Donor organs are too rare. We need a new definition of death. I don't like whoever's running the New York Times, because they just seem like not human. And I thought this was funny that this was an article done by an Indian guy. It looks like 2 Indian people and whoever Dean Smith is. People die in many ways. But in medicine, there are only 2 reasons a person can be declared dead. Either the heart has stopped or the brain has ceased to function, even if the heart is still beating. A person may serve as an organ donor only after being declared dead. Until then, transplant surgeons are not allowed even to interact with a dying patient. This commonsensical rule underpins organ donation in the United States and many other countries. Most donor organs today are obtained after brain death, defined by most state laws as a condition of permanent unconsciousness, with no spontaneous breathing, no response to pain, and no primitive reflexes. In other words, devastation of the whole brain. Organs obtained this way are often relatively healthy because brain-dead patients can continue to circulate blood and oxygen. Brain death is rare, though, and in New York State, with a population of 20 million, there are on average fewer than 500 cases suitable for organ procurement and transplantation each year. Far more often, people die because their heart has permanently stopped beating, which is known as circulatory death. However, precisely because the blood has stopped circulating, organs from people who die this way are often damaged and unsuited for transplantation. I'm gonna need to stop here for a second because I feel like I see the direction that this guy is going in. And if somebody dies and they suffer either a heart death or a brain death, I feel like it is far less ethical to use machines to keep that person's body pumping than it would be to just grow organs in a lab. And I understand the latter is going to take a lot more trial and error and have, like, a higher chance of failure because you're just growing new organs, but, like, I don't like the idea of underground areas and hospitals just filled with corpses being artificially pumped with blood to keep their organs alive. That seems wrong in a way. The need for donor organs is urgent. An estimated 15 people die in this country every day waiting for a transplant. We need to figure out how to obtain more healthy organs from donors while maintaining strict ethical standards. Well, an estimated 15 people die waiting for a transplant. But in New York State, there's fewer than 500 cases suitable for organ procurement. So that's still, let's say, roughly 500 cases. How many people are on the donor list and what are they waiting for, right? How many people per state is this number going to get up from? I feel like the harder part, right, isn't the availability of the organ, but the availability of an organ that matches the person that needs it, right? Because each individual person can only have so many other people that transplant organs to them that have a chance of not being completely fucking rejected by their body. And also, if we go back to a story I covered a few years ago in Korea, there was a businessman who needed some kind of transplant. I can't remember what it was. It might have been a heart transplant. I don't think it was, because I feel like, I don't think it was. But there was some business guy. Oh God, I'm gonna have to look it up because I don't like having wrong information. Hold on. A woman in her 50s was fined by a district court in Korea after promising to donate part of her liver to a company chairman in exchange for a job for her son. The promised liver transplant didn't take place because the woman contracted COVID-19 shortly before the operation. The chairman of the construction company, who was supposed to receive the liver transplant, has since died. On Tuesday, Park Jong-gil, a judge in the Seoul Central District Court's Criminal Division, ordered the woman to pay a fine of 3 million won, which is about $2,300 US, for violating the Organ Transplant Act. This past February, Ms. K heard from a friend that the chairman of a sizable construction company was seriously ill and needed a liver transplant. The friend connected her with an employee at the company in question, identified as Mr. N, who was the source of the information. Mr. N had gone to school with the company president, the son of the chairman, who needed a liver transplant. In a meeting with Mr. N, Miss K said that she was willing to donate her liver in exchange for 100 million won and a job for her son at the construction company. The chairman's son agreed to those terms. On March 7th, Miss K entered a hospital in Seoul to be tested prior to the organ transfer. She pretended to be the daughter-in-law of the chairman who was supposed to receive the transplant. A week later, Miss K was approved as an organ donor by the National Institute of Organ, Tissue, and Blood Management, but after being admitted to the hospital for the transplant, she was diagnosed with COVID-19, which caused the operation to be delayed. As Miss K's hospital stay dragged on, a nurse found Miss K's relationship with her caregivers suspicious and reported her to the relevant bodies for organ trafficking. And as a result, her surgery was cancelled. While the investigation and trial were underway, the construction company chairman, who had been waiting for the liver transplant, eventually passed away in July. So I feel like this should have been allowed to go through. If you are an individual and you make an agreement with another adult individual, I don't see the issue here. I get that some people could potentially be taken advantage of in this case, but you could also probably just make some kind of there have to be contracts when you make these, maybe, I don't know. Absolute insanity. A life for 77K. The fact that the guy died is what has me mostly yeah, organ donor lists, you sit on that shit for a long time, man. And I don't really see the issue with two adults making this arrangement if they're not coerced into it. True, but her lying about her relationship is inherently suspicious. She probably had to lie about it because if they found out that they had this arrangement, which they did, they would cancel the surgery and the guy would die, which is what happened. The need for donor organs is urgent. An estimated 15 people die in this country every day waiting for a transplant. We need to figure out how to obtain more healthy organs from donors while maintaining strict ethical standards. New technologies can help, but the best solution, we believe, is legal. We need to broaden the definition of death. Now, I'm not a genius here, but I think my idea of consensual adults deciding, hey, you got $77,000, I got a working liver, I can give you a bit of my liver for your $77,000, let's sign a contract, brother. I feel like that's a lot more ethical than broadening the definition of death. But I'm just a cartoon fox. Consider how things currently work. In the procedure known as donation after circulatory death, a typical donor is in an irreversible coma from, say, a drug overdose or a massive cerebral hemorrhage, and the heart is beating only because of life support. The donor is still not legally brain dead. He or she might have, say, a gag reflex or other primitive functions. In such cases, with the blessing of the family, a donor is brought into an operating room and life support is carefully withdrawn. If, as is expected, the removal of life support results in the stoppage of the heart, surgeons will wait long enough to determine that the stoppage is permanent, to be confident of death, but not so long that vital organs get damaged. This period is typically about 5 minutes, and then the surgeons remove the organs. And this is why it's important to have a will written with specific clauses in it, right? Like, my aunt that died earlier this year, she had a specific do not resuscitate clause. So when she flatlined, even though she could be brought back and she would probably be fine, they chose to not because she had the DNR. But even a few minutes of a stopped heart often results in damage to the organs. This deprives potential recipients of healthy organs and thwarts the wishes of donors to have their organs used to help others. Fortunately, there's a relatively new method that can improve the efficacy of donation after circulatory death. In this procedure, which is called normothermic regional perfusion, doctors take an irreversibly comatose donor off life support long enough to determine that the heart has stopped beating permanently. But then the donor is placed on a machine that circulates oxygen-rich blood through the body to preserve organ function. Donor organs obtained through this procedure, which is used widely in Europe and increasingly in the United States, tend to be much healthier. I think this is creepy. I think it's creepy to have a person be completely dead, but you're pumping their body full of blood to keep things circulating, to preserve their organs, to give to other people. I think that's kind of weird. And it's also interesting. It's also interesting to read this And in the effort to explain how this guy wants to use people's corpses, because that's what they are, let's be real. He wants to use people's corpses as, like, living bio-organ farms. He makes the distinction between the donor and the body. Which is, again, interesting, because typically you don't bring the metaphysical into, like, scientific literature, especially in, like, healthcare stuff, right? Like, everything based on medical science is based on physical reality. You don't talk about the metaphysical in regards to, like, the personality and the soul. But this guy is making a distinction between the donor and the body. So would the donor be the personality that is imprinted into the brain, and once the donor no longer exists, that body then becomes property of the hospital? But if we're talking about souls and we're getting into that kind of aspect of things, wouldn't that kind of need, I guess, more explanation in other areas of the medical field as well? But by artificially circulating blood and oxygen, the procedure can reanimate a lifeless heart. Some doctors and ethicists find the procedure objectionable because in reversing the stoppage of the heart, it seems to nullify the reason the donor was declared dead in the first place. Is the donor no longer dead, they wonder? Proponents of the procedure reply that the resumption of the heartbeat should not be considered resuscitation. The donor still has no independent functioning, nor is there any hope of it. They say that it is not the donor, but rather regions of the body that have been revived. Okay, so again, we're making even further distinctions, once again, that the donor, the soul, the personality, the person who was imprinted and in charge of moving the flesh puppet, is no longer there. This is merely a body that the donor has decided they want to have used for science. I don't know, this brings up like a weird little ethical conundrum here. How to resolve this debate? The solution, we believe, is to broaden the definition of brain death to include irreversibly comatose patients on life support. Using this definition, these patients would be legally dead, regardless of whether a machine restored the beating of their heart. That sounds evil. That doesn't sound right to me. This is awfully reminiscent of the clump of cells argument for abortion. And I mean, like, I also get it. You can't really make advances in science sometimes without doing incredibly unethical things. I mean, what, we only know exactly how much water there is in the human body because of Unit 731 and how the Japanese would take prisoners and then weigh them and then bake them to death and then weigh them afterwards, right? Like, so sometimes you only get advancement through suffering, and I hate thinking about that, so I typically choose not to. Thank you, woman brain. Apart from increased organ availability, there's also a philosophical reason for wanting to broaden the definition of brain death. The brain functions that matter most to life are those such as consciousness, memory, intention, desire. Once those higher brain functions are irreversibly gone, is it not fair to say that a person, as opposed to a body, has ceased to exist? See, I think it is weird, right? Okay? In utero, when you are a fetus, if you have something that would irreparably hamper you from living a life, right? Like if you get born with like multiple limbs, or like you're hard on the outside of your body, or you have like a horrid disfigurement that makes you look like a 2-foot tall alien that can't grow hair or something, right? Just like crazy birth defects and horrendous handicaps born. Gene editing could make it so you're not born that way, and you could live a fully functional life. In my opinion, if I, as a woman, were to go through with giving birth to a baby that would not be able to have higher functions, such as their own consciousness, their ability to remember things, having intentions, having desires, being able to be loved, I would feel like a monster for giving birth to that child who will know nothing but suffering in their life. But, on the flip side, when you have a person who has inhabited their body for whoever knows how many years, whether it's 7 years, 18 years, 20 years, 50 years, however old, like they are a person. They have become a person. They were a person with consciousness and memory and intention and desire, as this function says. When they die, I still think they have ownership over their body, even though their consciousness is no longer here. So it would be really weird to then take their body as a ward of the state to use as an organ farm. There's, I feel like, a reason why every single culture, no matter how advanced they were at any point in time, always had some sort of rules about desecration. Even cultures that practiced like barbaric human sacrifice rituals tended to have things revolving around desecration. Understandably, some will worry that doctors will prematurely pronounce a patient irreversibly comatose, when in fact the patient is not, or there is genuine hope for recovery. This is rare, but it can happen, as recently documented by the Times. Is this going to be the guy? A push for more organ transplants is putting donors at risk. No. I thought this was going to be a link to the article of the guy who, like, they thought was dead, and they were about to start ripping his organs out, and then he woke up on the operating table. And they were like, oh fuck, I guess we can't take your organs now. That sort of concern, however, is about practicality, such as whether doctors are following protocol properly, and whether external pressures are creating perverse incentives for doctors and other medical workers to be careless. I don't think... I think there's enough doctors who... I wouldn't even say careless. I just think they're, let's say, weird. There's enough doctors that I would not trust them to put in practice not killing people for the sake of using their body as an organ farm. These are critical issues, to be sure, but it remains possible and common to responsibly determine whether someone is irreversibly comatose. And in such cases, a judgment of brain death is merited, as the law should be revised to reflect. In 1968, a committee of doctors and ethicists at Harvard came up with a definition of brain death, the same basic definition most states use today. In its initial report, the committee noted that there is a great need for the tissues and organs of the hopelessly comatose in order to restore to health those who are still salvageable. So I want to point out that Harvard has been a shitty place for a while, and that it seems insane to me that they would refer to people in better health as just still salvageable. That's a little crazy wording, man. Reminder that by profession, doctors joined the Nazi Party in greater proportion than any other career. Oh my god. This frank assessment was edited out of the final report because of a reviewer's objection, but it is one that should guide death and organ policy today. And it's like, maybe this is where, like, I am incorrect because I'm in my feelings in the same way that some people would, like, just object to any kind of gene editing whatsoever, right? This could be where, like, I'm on the side of, like, I'm erring on too much caution. I don't know. But I don't think this is ethical. And I don't think you should keep people alive in order to harvest their organs after they've been brain dead or their heart has stopped. I think that's a weird thing to do with the bodies. And like, this kind of goes back into, I guess, our conversation of sometimes unethical things might have to be done in order to advance science, but I can't really see what would be advanced here besides, like, just using people as organ farms. And as we see setting up the, like, the maid kind of services and, like, that suicide pod company that's getting sued in Switzerland or somewhere, I can't remember, we covered it last year. But, like, with all of these, you know, have you considered suicide as an option places and people they could potentially keep alive as organ farms even if they didn't consent to it? Like, I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way. It rubs me the wrong way, man.